Welcome to the Stories That Shape Us, where we have conversations about how discovering your identity, enhancing your relationships, and taking risks lead to a more purposeful life. I'm Tina Morales, and I'm an associate professional counselor and master's level marriage and family therapist. In my counseling practice, I help couples move from conflict to connection so they can start to live out their relationship vision.
I'm Kiera Johnson, and I own ATL Pula Wellness Studio with the vision of giving every family the hope and freedom to live a healthier life. Through our work, we create spaces and provide resources that foster true well-being.
We came together to bring you these stories so you can collect tools and insights from those who have stepped into their power and are making an impact. Join us on the road less traveled. All right, welcome to the Stories That Shape Us. My name is Tina Morales.
And I'm Kiera Johnson.
And today we have the amazing opportunity to interview the one and only Cynthia Pearson. Am I saying it right? Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about Cynthia. Cynthia is originally from Puerto Rico, and is a member of the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress. She's also a certified trauma specialist and advanced restorative justice practitioner. Cynthia is a career victims' rights advocate that has spent 13 years in the court system supporting survivors of complex trauma, developing trauma-informed community programs, and providing law enforcement-specific training. Cynthia is a member of the State of Georgia's Human Trafficking Task Force, Fulton County Family Violence Task Force, Spelman College's Coordinated Community Response Team, I gotta make sure I get it right, and regularly guest lectures on victimology and social work protocols to undergraduate and graduate students. Okay, if you haven't heard enough yet, you need her.
Yes.
Cynthia believes in cultivating a culture of purpose that empowers us to pursue our passions to affect large-scale positive impact. She's passionate for innovation at every turn and developing strategic partnership models. She says collaborating with communities to ensure that people can access services that offer meaningful life opportunities is my jam.
Love it.
Cynthia was recently recognized as Georgia State University's 40 Under 40 alumni and selected to the MIT and Stand Together Venture Labs Unbundle Policing Accelerator program. Woo! Woo!
That's some good work.
Right.
Great work.
That right, if you can't tell, we are in for a treat of learning all the things right now, okay? Cynthia, thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Very excited for this. So I have that's the follow-up question I had, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So can you tell us what advanced restorative justice practitioner is?
Yes. So the idea behind restorative justice, or the practice of restorative justice models, is to engage individuals, particularly the community, surrounding ways in which we can restore harm when harm has occurred, but allow an opportunity for that to be in a moment of circles. And so the idea behind circle is actually very of an ancient model. It's nothing new. We just, in our language, developed a term for it. But many of the tribal nations and our ancestral communities practice restorative justice.
Wow.
And it's something that is really unique in that it allows for the individual who had harm done against them to voice their concern, voice the ideas of how they want the impact to resonate with the person who committed the harm. So that way they understand what happened, how it impacted them, but also co-create solutions that make them feel whole again.
Wow.
So restorative justice is actually practiced in a lot of different ways. You see it in the criminal justice system in some districts that are, I would say, more open to that model.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is about consent for both parties, right?
Right.
And then the other piece is also in the schools. So as opposed to seeing that traditional model of detention or suspension even, restorative justice practitioners will go into school, teach students and staff alike, what are the reasons why we are missing in communication? Or what are the reasons why we show up in conflict with emotions that are really heightened, like anger or resentment or, all the big feelings.
Yeah.
And how can we sort of bring that down to one that we can collectively agree upon? So that way we don't have this residue of issues.
Yeah.
And then it takes away the stigma of feeling like everything has to be punitive, or like there's always a consequence to behavior. And it's more about the accountability. Consequence traditionally in our world, like in the Western culture, usually meant some sort of like punishment or like a sense of exile from your community.
Yep. Yes.
And with restorative justice, you're really starting to center in that moment. So if you visualize like a circle, you're really closing in all the gaps.
Okay.
And that's what that means. And so
that's
it's
awesome.
just like an elevated way of teaching restorative justice.
Yeah. That's awesome. Seems like it's necessary for healing and lasting change. So that's good to know.
Yeah, there's a lot of research backed for these practices and these models. So it's really neat that sort of like science has caught up to it, and like institutions have recognized its value. But at the same time, we know like not everyone is going to buy into that, because we still haven't gotten to the point where, as a collective society, we agree that people have trauma and that we all carry the burdens of that.
We do,
And even those who have, in society's terms, committed some sort of wrong or have violated some sort of like social code, that they deserve some sort of acknowledgement as well.
Wow. Right. That's awesome. There's so many layers to that.
There are so many layers to that. I'm like we could
have a whole different session on that.
I know.
That's pretty awesome.
I think what I'm hearing is that it's almost like a way of, I like this circle imagery, right? Like it's bringing people together. It's addressing rather than kind of having two people or like two opposing forces on opposite ends. It's like we're trying to bring everyone together to address the traumas that's occurred and how that's influencing the whole, and not just like separating the individuals from this.
It's like everyone's accountable for even the person who did the harm. It's kind of like, why did you?
Yeah.
That's why it's really powerful.
Yeah, and sometimes that can look like an apology, or other times it could look like someone just saying like, or asking the question why. And some survivors or victims, they just want to know why it was them. And that's usually all that they really need to sort of close the chapter for themselves. But in the traditional systems, there is no opportunity really for someone to stand up and be like, hey, why'd you do this? And then give them the opportunity to respond, because there's a lot of consequences when you start to speak, right? So in this moment, you're able to really control that narrative, because that person is theoretically and in the practice is willing and desires to share the why, or the apology, or whatever it is that they wanted to hear. And then it just gives more control back to the person who actually was the one that was harmed. Versus like the overall systems of players that be, they're like the puppeteers, right? So like we want to make sure like power is restored back to the community.
That's awesome.
Seriously,
I'm
so glad you clarified that, because I truly, we might need to just have a whole nother interview on
really
that.
Awesome.
Because that's just, it's huge, and it's so counter what we're doing in our society now. And especially now with everything that's going on, I feel like there's just so much that you could tap into.
That's what I was just thinking.
It's just, it's incredible, but I don't want to. I don't want to digress.
Thank you for explaining that. That's awesome.
I appreciate that.
Well, I like to jump in. One of my favorite questions is, what story in your life or experience led you to do the work that you do?
Yeah, I thought about this, and I couldn't find a particular single moment. There were, I think, a collective of moments, like a collage of things. Where I also needed services as a survivor and as a victim, but then witnessing so many people go through similar scenarios, hearing a lot of stories from individuals. And I think it was like around the time that I could guess is that when I was in juvenile court, working in juvenile court, and that was probably like a moment or moments of like, wow, like, this isn't working. I think at least for a lot of us who go into this field, like I majored in criminal justice, I really wanted to be in this system with the idea of, if I go in, then I can just change it all. And like we can really make it better. Like I mean, my whole class was like that. It was like really like nebulous, like we have the answers.
Youthful energy.
And then you go in and it's like, you know, a lot of police say this, but they'll say you graduate from the academy, you get with your field training officer, and they'll always tell you, forget what you learned, I'm going to tell you what you should do. And that's literally what happens. It's like you go into the criminal legal system, whether you're an attorney or whether you go in as probation, or for me, I wanted in victim services, and they're like, forget what you learned, just let's follow what we do. You know, and then at the same time, it's like this other side of the coin is, but we're trying to make it better.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, how do we do that if you're not allowing for change to actually occur, or there's always so much pushback?
Yeah.
So in juvenile court, by then, I had been in the system, or working in the system for at least, I think, 6 years by then. And nothing felt like it was moving. It felt like literally time was just stopped. Like we were still operating in a very like archaic mythology.
Yeah.
You know, we may have like a computer now.
Yep.
But like we're still acting like Neanderthals, like in the way in which that we communicate, we navigate spaces, the way we show up in different, you know, moments. And for me, it was just like I got tired of hearing all of these stories, and eventually you get to the point where it's just like someone's name is different, but the stories lines are usually like pretty similar, or very parallel. And so that's when I was like, I need to leave the government system and move into nonprofit work and be back into the community and have more of like community-based models. And that's where a lot of that training came in, and like operating into those programs and generating the interests of trauma-informed care and talking about these multi-layers, because again, you know, I was around a lot of juveniles who were labeled as delinquent or juveniles who had like dependency cases, and there was so much opportunity there. I mean, but again, it was a revolving door of like, we just go through this machine, and then we're just going to continue doing it because we've been doing, and nothing changes.
Right.
But then we expect different outcomes. So now we're talking about insanity. So like, you know,
you're right.
You know, like here we are. So yeah, it was all of that that became sort of like this force that you just have to acknowledge. And when that ember starts to get brighter and bigger, and the flames are really like high, like you just can't ignore it. There is no extinguishing. Like, and that's where it just became like, I'm done with that part.
How would you say, like, so going from governmental to nonprofit work, and then also even recognizing the trauma aspect behind all of this, like, how did you maybe discover, or how did you start to dive into trauma work, and how did that even just like, I don't know, resonate with your own story of like, okay, this is truly what's happening. Like, there's so much trauma.
You know, I would say before, so when I was in college, I survived an attack, and that was something that was like really like, that kind of like was also a moment in time where it was just like a pause. But then also, I really sort of grounded back into like culturally how I was raised. So growing up on the island, like there's like a really distinct way in which you think of survival. And it's different from like maybe like even like stateside, because there's just so much that infrastructure wise is already there, right? Like you don't think about like power outages in the way that you do here on the island. You don't think about like hurricane season the way that you're like, you know, in some parts of the country. You know, obviously like tornadoes, right? But like there's just a different way to live life over there. But there's also like a really much ingrained like I believe like in our bloodline of resistance. And I talk about culture. Yeah, and there's a lot of rebellion and a lot of just activism. And I saw that with my grandmother. I remember going as a kid to different like protests or like political rallies, and it was very common on the island to just do that like regularly, and it didn't look like what we see here. It was very like celebratory. Like if you didn't rally or sort of like have a voice, like there was something really, really wrong with you. Like you weren't listening. Like, you know, like you're not being a good listener. Like, I tell my son, you're not being a listener right now. but like it just was a part of it. Like you're out with like, you know, the drums and you're singing and you're dancing, and there's always like one by not playing. There's just like always something going on, right?
Wow.
Yeah, it's always like something like all the time. So I recognized that wasn't something that was unique there, but I didn't see that when I moved here. But that was, again, another one of those like embers that you have. And that came out when I started to feel really angry about the response when I then became a victim of crime. And I'm like, this isn't working. And it just became like, again, like a little like, you know, turn on the switch. Like, oh, when this doesn't work, then we fight against it. And it's just like something that you do. So it's like inherent in what who we are. So that was part of like that, like sort of channeling of that level of activism. And again, like I said, when I became a victim of crime, I recognized very instantly that the system wasn't allowing for me to fully heal or be a part of the process. And on paper and systemic wise, I do say victims have a right to impact statement. Victims can appear in court. You can address the judge. But how does that really look like? You know, and then a lot of that is also very much, I don't want to say controlled, but it is molded by the other parties that are involved. So like the prosecutor, even like a victim advocate, you know, not all victim advocates are created equal. So like, you know, you just have to think about that the process is intended to pursue justice on behalf of the state. Although you are a victim and you are a party to the case and you are technically the state's witness, the state doesn't represent you. The state represents the best interest of itself. So, and many times when I was the victim, and then many times when I became a victim advocate, I recognized I was telling some victims, well, when you say your victim impact statement, you might have to say this differently. Or we are not able to pursue these particular charges because of this XYZ. So you may not be able to say that in your impact statement, reference that area. You know, there was a lot of intervening that happened. And I understood, like we understand logically why. But that doesn't mean that we sort of agreed to it. Like you're now taking away the human experience of what happened and expecting somebody to show up as a human. Like, how does that make sense? You know? So that's when I realized how much trauma was being ignored. But then when it shows up in different ways, we would be like, well, why? Or what happened? Or, you know, just questions of like, is there a way to just cover that up? And
it's almost like trauma is being ignored, but also perpetuated.
But it's perpetuated. It is. I mean, we talk in trainings a lot. We talk about how do we re-victimize victims by the things that we do and say. And that is about, you know, cultural humility. That is about understanding, you know, accessibility, having like multilingual services. All the things, right? But that is how, you know, the wisdom of trauma shows up in ways for people that recognize, like, okay, this isn't working, so now let's learn from it. Let's do something different.
Ooh, man, that is. I know. It's big, and like I feel like, again, there's layers to this. If you could maybe, in like the most, like if someone's like, okay, you're talking about trauma, you're talking about being a victim, like all these terms that mean a lot of things. How would you maybe define that trauma, being a victim of some sort of attack, some sort of perpetrator is attacking, whatever it is? How could you define it for someone so they can say, okay, you know what? Yes, this is my experience, and yes, I have experienced trauma. Like, how would you maybe help somebody understand that?
There's a quote that I have yet to find who said this, so I'm not sure who owns this language, but this is a quote that I use often in describing trauma to adults, is what the hand experiences, the mind remembers. And not to focus solely on just like the hand as being what the hand experiences, but think of the hand as like the symbolism of like the body. So taking out that word hand and saying what the body experiences, the mind remembers. Whatever we experience resonates with our mind, and not necessarily the mind of how we talk about like our mind brain as a parallel word, but just in literally the neuroscience of our brain, it leaves a memory, it leaves an implant, it rewires things, it completely changes our hormonal responses. And so if you think about it, that really opens up the door in the conversation to just a lot of different things. So that's when we talk about like intergenerational trauma, when we talk about like racial trauma, all of that. So now we're really, again, opening up more conversations to the depth and the range of experiences that the hand remembers. I mean, the hand experiences, the body remembers, right? Or the mind remembers. So all of those pieces are the best way for me to explain how trauma presents, because then we can start to relate, even a simple scenario. I remember when I, hurt my hand, I thought I was never going to be able to write again. Well, the hand experienced it, the brain remembered, and now whenever I even like pull my finger a different way or, whatever, I'm like in a state of like panic. Why? Like, so again, these are all these responses that our brain is doing for the purposes of survival. To prevent that.
I'm so glad you asked that, because mental health is now coming more to the forefront of conversation. But in the past, for certain cultures, you don't talk about it, and it's like powerful to say, well, you might have experienced something like this. You might need to address it. You know what I mean? Like that's great.
Yeah. Even the way that we communicate. Like a lot of things we've done, or our parents have done, and their parents and the parents before them, they said things as a way to just for survival. Or to prevent harm. And then we don't recognize that those communication styles or those tactics are being, transferred down generation, just passed on, just like
unaddressed.
Unaddressed. Without any context or even a point of like, okay, no, this is like not it. And so we just repeat out of it being modeled. And as as a species, that's how we learn is modeled behavior. So like, how crazy to think like, now that we're talking about if everything we learn is modeled, then that means even the harm that we witness and experience has been modeled. So where did that come from?
Right.
So like, let's maybe talk about parenting.
Cynthia.
Like,
I see so many spin-offs to this.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Yeah,
and it's a point of contention for a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists who are not trauma informed, but even for those who are part of the publications of the DSM-4s and all the different versions of that manual. Because when trauma started to become more introduced, and it was really a movement about what is trauma, like back in the 80s and 70s, it was rejected to be a part of the manual for a very particular reason. Think about if we were to identify trauma as a diagnosis. So then who's responsible? The idea behind the manual is to identify a responsibility and then outcome, prognosis, and then like a prescription. Right? Well, what do we prescribe for racial trauma?
Oof.
Like what do we prescribe for car accident that happened and now I have post-traumatic stress or sexual violence or gender-based violence? Like who pays for that? Is the idea. Right.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
Spin off.
I'm gonna let that one just sit for a second, because that is it is so layered, and I think in a culture that desires quick fixes. I think when we define things like this, like trauma, complex trauma, just like intergenerational trauma, like when we really we recognize there's not a quick fix. And so it requires us to slow down, to be with, to understand, to like practice all these things. And I don't know if I think our culture resists that a little bit.
And it's odd it's one of those things where it's hard to find an actual like pinpoint, like where the shift happened. Because again, before our societies became what they are today, and we can be grateful for that and like the idea of evolution and industrialization. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that before we were very salutogenic. Now we're more pathogenic in the sense that there's always this medical model of pursuing solutions that are sort of contained in the idea of there's something inherently wrong with me. There's a solution that requires a medical response, right? But really, it's that most of the time we can find a solution that isn't in that path.
Yeah.
You know, we can find a solution that is halogenic, so that it is about the whole self, and it is about like, you know, nature versus nurture, and like considering all the different elements for true healing that's long term, not like this, you know, AM PM pill, right? Like, we need to talk about like the whole day, the whole experience, the whole person. But yeah, there's a big resistance to that because it's just not. Capitalist societies just don't allow for that, right? And I'm not saying like we need to now not be capitalist because we benefit from it certainly, but there's a way in which we can try to sort of hold onto the reins more on some of these ideas, so we can be part of that solution that serves us better.
Oh, that's good.
That's
good. I'm curious for you along this journey, like kind of going from you went to a graduate program or for I think you said criminology. What was your graduate?
Oh, so that was conflict management.
Conflict management. Okay. So you went from there. You were working for government for a while. Then you went to the nonprofit world. What would you say, like along your journey and continuing on, what has been probably the most challenging with a lot of what we've been talking about? What's been the most challenging aspect throughout this entire journey for you?
You know, it's funny when we picked that card. Resiliency is probably really the most challenging, and it's sort of like this fight for like always trying to like survive these moments. Because the reason why I moved out of all of these different positions is because I didn't find that I was being like true to what I believed in, and like purpose-driven, like value sets and all of those things are really, really important to me. And it's like the way in which I even just consider like, you know, life. Like it's just everything has to align, everything has to be in balance as much as possible. And so I never found balance in those spaces, or I felt like there was a lot of like conflict with systems that didn't meet my impression of what my values were. So being resilient to like understand like, okay, if I'm battling this issue, or like there's so much conflict in government with like supervisors and different departments and things, and you're like, oh my god, like y'all are like, this is wrong. You know? And like they're just like looking at you crazy. So like how do you like rise above that? And like the idea of being resilient, you know, to like be able to withstand all of the different like triggers, right? Like and all of the different ways in which evil just like rears its head.
Because you're facing it. You're
facing that. Wow. So that has been consistent. I think is just finding ways that you just stay grounded and remember like the purpose and like why you're doing things, that eventually you will get to what you know you desire.
Ooh, that's good.
That's awesome.
Resiliency fits.
It really does. It fits you. So,
I know.
It's kudos.
It is so hard to be resilient. Kind of like what we were saying, when you're facing so many challenges in front of you, like all the time. I in my trauma training, one thing that I've learned that's helpful for that, like so that this vicarious trauma or like this secondary traumatic stress is the more that I learn and the more that I educate myself, the more that kind of builds that resiliency factor. So it's like I don't feel like I'm just giving what I already know. Right? Like I'm giving myself, the more I pour into me, that kind of helps to buffer some of that. That's something that I've learned. I don't know if that's been similar for you, but okay. No, it's true. And I think, and I say this a lot to different clients that I'm coaching is, you know, knowledge, we hear that when we were kids, I think, like, oh, knowledge is power. Like, you know, but really it is. If we really like appreciate it in the way that it was meant to be, the more we know, the better we are. And like, it really just builds up an invisible armor. And I describe that to kids as like, you know, when we're talking about trauma, when we do like these different mindfulness practices, and I'm like, you know, you're like, you have an armor and you have a shield, and you're putting it over your knees. What's the, you know, like different pieces, and like thinking about it as you build up your armor, like how strong do you want to be? I want to be really strong, you know. And it's like talk about it more, and it just really is encouraging to think about like how if we visualize the way that knowledge can be for us, then we can start to visualize how powerful we are. Oh, I like that. I think visualizations are always super powerful. It might be because I'm a visual learner. I don't I don't know if it's everybody, but whenever I can see something, like truly have an image of what that looks like, it's super helpful. But I do have another question in terms of maybe this resiliency factor. I don't know if this is a part of it, but how would you say relationships have been helpful in this journey or influential in this journey at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that most of my relationships have been, my most long-standing relationships have been friendships. And that has always been like the grounding force. And then when I got married, that relationship was like a priority for me. So then because it was a priority for me, like the ways in which we, collaborate even was really a part of why I was able to be successful in like different areas. But yeah, that was probably like the biggest thing is really finding ways that my relationships always stayed consistent. And if things were not consistent, then it was like, okay, readjust. Like we're either moving away or this person is either like changing or whatever. But that's probably the best way for me, or has been the best way for me to be like resilient. But that's what friendships are. That's what, intimate relationships are. It's the place where you feel seen and heard and you're the most safe, ideally.
That's powerful. And I get how you need those relationships to help you kind of push through and be resilient, and kind of tagging on to that. So you have to overcome so much doing the work you do, and like you said, the systems that you're up against. What fulfills you and keeps you going? What's the most fulfilling that keeps you going towards these amazing missions that you have?
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think there's a lot. I do find absolute pleasure in hearing somebody say like, oh, I didn't think about that. I honestly do, because I feel like, oh, we now, like, I think of the world as like, like the universe is like just different little stars, and like, oh, the star just like lit up. You know what I mean? And like maybe there was like some dim over here. Oh, we just got something brighter. And that is like what pushes me, is if someone has said that, like, or they maybe it resonated, whatever we talked about resonating with them. And then of course, like client work, that's just like a big thing. Working with individuals and seeing them make a shift, and all of a sudden they feel like I have so much, like gratitude for what they have in front of them, where they didn't see it before. And like, that's just a part of me. Like, to me, it's just like another extension. So as they, grow and learn and find abundance where they see it, that's also for me too. So that's like that part where it just really keeps pushing.
Oh, I love that. It reminds me of what you were talking about with trauma, right? Where it's like, I'm gonna try and remember how you said it. But the hand experiences, the mind remembers. The mind remembers. Yes. It's almost like in those moments when someone is saying, "Hey, I never thought of it like that." It's almost like there's a new. I'm gonna try and stay away from the research terms and stuff. But it's almost like you make a new connection.
A new neural pathway.
Yes. I'm trying to like stay away from it. Like, you're literally making a new connection for them, and you are a part of rewriting this story. That helps them to say, okay, I am continuing a process of becoming, right? And as a part of this becoming, Cynthia's just stepped in and helped you chart a new course.
I love that. Yep, exactly.
It's so awesome.
Powerful.
Yes.
That was great.
I love it. But what would you say is maybe like one way for people who are trying to figure out, like, how can I maybe try to chart a new course, or what is like a practical first step, or like a tool for me to get there?
Oh, so I've never left it as one. I've always say two things. So when someone, they've asked us before, and I would say the first thing is to learn about your own personal history or family history, whatever that is. If that means like a parent or a caregiver or a relative that knows the most about you and your family, find out as much as you can. I think history has a really unique way of telling us a little bit of prediction of our future. whether that means we're going to be continuing that history,
Yeah.
or that there's something about the history that I want to completely avoid because I know I don't want that as part of my story. Right?
Yeah.
So knowing our past is super critical, and it also helps us, going back to what we were talking about, is like intergenerational trauma. So like knowing what happened to my parents, what happened to maybe my grandparents, or just an idea.
Yeah.
As much as possible. And then the second thing is to think about meditation in a way as an opportunity to access our like inner value system.
You know, I'm all for that.
You know?
Yes.
Yes, it's that quiet time. It's like finding ways that I see or feel in my body where I'm most stressed or where energy keeps going. You know, for a lot of people, like for, you know, in their head, that's a space where they need to kind of get out of because they recognize I'm always having sinus issues. I can't breathe all the time, you know, or like I can't, you know, whatever. So we think about like all of our systems, and then if you put that up against like the systems of human design and recognizing, okay, this is what's resonating for me, literally, physically, but then emotionally. Those are like probably the best ways to sort of figure out, okay, what's next for me, and what do I want my story to look like?
Okay.
Because now you've found out what's worked in the past, because you are, you know, you're the future ancestor of your ancestors.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So like, you want to know
Hope you'll
what's
catch
that.
that. You're the future ancestor of your ancestors? I'm still trying to make it happen. Yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
So like, you're the future.
Wow.
So like, find out what happened.
Yeah.
So then you know, okay, this, not this. Oh yes, I really like, you know what I mean? Like we can start to sort of like a la carte some things in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But then also find out, okay, what's up with me too.
Yep.
So that I know what sits well and what doesn't. And then again, we all know this is like our body tells us stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, what's our body also telling us that we need to like write down and figure out and connect with?
Ooh.
I didn't even think that would be one. I love those answers, like the history part, and even we've talked a little bit about racial trauma and how disconnected and displaced, obviously, from our history. But like, even when you think of overcoming and the people overcoming today, it's like a foot down. It's like a reclaiming of like who I am,
absolutely,
what I come from. So I think that's so powerful.
Yeah,
so powerful.
Yeah. And it's a good thing, like how you said that. It's a good way to start even a journal entry. It's like, do you know where I come from?
Yes.
And then like say all of that, like writing it all down.
Yep.
I mean, to see that in black and white, you know, on paper, it would be like really transformational. Wow.
I'm literally mesmerized. This is really awesome.
Good.
She's like,
I do have. I know you have do you have another question? Because I was gonna say I got a question.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Jump in after.
Okay. So a question for me, because I remember when I was first going through. So when I was going through my graduate program, it was a lot. We were talking a lot about trauma, and I would have never thought in my mind, and I'm very self-aware and self-reflective. I thought, right? But like first of all, I maybe wouldn't have called what I went through as trauma. So I love that you defined that for us. But then the other piece was that I didn't realize how disconnected from my body I was. And so even the idea of connecting to my body was so different for me. It was like so foreign. And so I'm curious if you have like an exercise or something like to help people get connected to their bodies.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'll say for everyone it's different, because I do recognize that for a lot of, like you mentioned, disconnection from bodies is definitely a trauma response. So like, I encourage people to do that in a safe way. Because similarly, I was also very disconnected, but it's because I didn't, previously and with family dynamics and just in zero conversation about like body autonomy. You know, like it's very much like, oh, like this is mine, like I own this. Oh, I didn't know, because like like really understanding like what feels safe, like, you know, touching yourself and what that feels like. You know, like the intimacy of yourself.
I like the intimacy. I love that. Of yourself. That's a quotable.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So like really understanding that like those boundaries, like you have to have your boundaries even within yourself, right? But a good way also is just really breath work. That's something that I found has been really transformative, and everyone can do that for the most part without it triggering too much of a response, or it's done in a way that gives them like a little flag if it becomes too much.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It's a gentle way of connecting without feeling like I need to do necessarily like a practice of like, you know, yoga even, for instance. And sometimes that could be too much for individuals.
Yeah.
But breath work, it's such a natural bodily response.
Yeah.
Like we can really start talking about breath work, and then people really find in their space what's holding on for them, what is difficult, and then they can at least stop it.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, there's a little more control of that.
Yes.
But that's one thing that I do practice often is also bee breathing, which is something that we do with kids.
Yeah.
The bee breath work is something that's very consistent with mindful practices for children, but it's really helpful for adults, and I actually just love that one.
Explain that one to us.
You want to do it together for a second?
Yeah,
Sure.
You're the expert in that. So
I want to know what you do with the kids. Okay, so you take a big inhale. As you exhale, keep your mouth closed and make a bee sound like you're humming.
This is bee. I've never done this.
And you can even like do a little bit like a buzz.
Okay.
So like with the kids, we do a little bit of a buzz because they understand. For them, you have to make everything very concrete for kids when you're teaching.
Yes.
Yep.
So like a bee. What does a bee sound?
Yep.
You know, so you take in the deep breath and you go, and then they start to take more control, and they go, you know. But
Very
what
cool.
happens is that they feel the vibration.
Yeah.
And the vibration sensation is a really good way to connect with the body, because it's such a moment for the brain to start to concentrate on literally what it's feeling. Like vibrations are really, really important. Like we talk about vibrations in just energy and in the space, right? Like, I don't like this vibe or whatever. But it's people talk about it and they don't realize how powerful it is. But the breath work for deep breathing is really, really cool. And it just helps like calm things down.
Yes.
It's guiding your breath just deep.
Yes.
Right.
Creating space in your body and calming the mind, calming the nerves. I mean, breath work can go on.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So if y'all need some deep breathing or breath work, now you know.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have a question for you. If you had 3 lessons, what are 3 lessons you would leave someone who is forging their way in their own story? You've clearly done amazing stuff. And what would you leave with someone who's kind of trying to find their way in their purpose?
Yeah. 3 things. So one is to write it down. What it is that they envision, to write it down. You know, whether they're just starting that vision or they're in the midst of it, to always write that down and keep it somewhere where you can always reflect on it and get back to it and be guided by that. The second is to find someone who also believes in that vision. I think it's really important.
Relationships.
Relationships. Yeah,
Yes.
that is your jam.
Yes. My jam.
Yeah, relationships are super critical.
Yep.
And what I think it also does is even to put it in like not talking about trauma in this work. Even in marketing, it always just takes that one follower, right? It just takes that one follower to make your business boom. It takes that one person to buy that product. It takes that one person to say, I like it and I'm going to share it. And then, here you are. So that is always really critical, is to find somebody who also believes in it, because that becomes your sort of mirror, your reflection for that vision. It's like, how am I doing on this? Or like, what do you think about this thing? Or, how can I support you even? Is that usually what they should be giving back to you? But those relationships are always really critical as well. The third thing I would say is to think of ways that you can also teach somebody about this vision. So similar where you have support, it's always really unique to sort of plant seeds about your vision. Because with that, as we know, we nurture things. We can nurture a plant, it grows, and it becomes bigger than what we imagined, bigger than what we envisioned. That's really important for how we decide our purpose is going to outlast us. If we just keep it within ourselves and it's just like my own thing, then there's no real way for it to sort of scale, right? And if we're doing things for the purposes of like making change or creating a better world, then we need to plant the seeds of that vision elsewhere. And that's probably the best way to think of it in a sense that it's not just about me.
Yep.
It's also about the futures of me
Yeah.
and, you know, the people that I love.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
I love that. It reminds me like when two or more agree, so kind of getting
Yeah.
that out of yourself
Yeah.
and with
Yeah.
someone, and then of course like then going to your purpose and helping someone is kind
Yep.
of what I took.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say if we can. So the 3 things we're saying: write it down.
Write it down.
I kind of heard the second one as like partner with someone who's like
Yep, like support.
support, and then it's almost like pour out in terms of like teaching or like sharing with what you have with
Yep,
someone else.
exactly.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
I like this.
Yes. So we're wrapping up, and I always love to ask this question at the end. What is one question that maybe we did not ask you, and how would you answer it?
Oh gosh, I forgot about this. Okay. Let's see. Question you didn't ask.
Or you wish we would have asked you?
How am I doing?
Yeah.
I asked that, and I say that in a way of saying, I think that it's really critical to like check in with all of us all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it may not be phrased, how are you doing? But
Sure.
it's like, how can I support you today? Like, is there anything that you can do to help what's going on? Or like, whatever it comes out for your own, verbiage. But I would say, asking how we are and how we are in the space.
Mm-hmm.
But I would answer it is that my intention for today really was to just be as transparent and honest as possible. So I'm feeling good in that space.
Oh, I'm glad.
I love that question.
Yeah.
And I really like the intention behind it, right? It's not like a how you doing as a greeting.
And skipping past, it's truly.
It's like a how are you doing, like truly, like how can we check in with you?
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us of that. That's necessary and needed. Cynthia, you, my goodness, we could stay here with you for so much longer. You truly are, like, you truly have such a wealth of knowledge, but I think also more than that, I think you have a wealth of just goodness that you can bring to people. With everything that you know, everything that you've experienced and shared with us, you can really see that, like, the goodness that you have, you just want to pour that out. So
thank you.
I'm grateful.
Yeah.
I'm grateful
me
that you
too.
decided
The
to
best
share
spirit,
with us.
yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. It was amazing. Just listening to you. Yeah.
Oh,
I
thank you.
feel like you have so much to teach, and
I know.
I learned quite a bit already. I can see a few follow-ups and spin-offs and to this. But
Yeah.
it's awesome.
I would love that. This was
Yes.
a lot of fun. I really enjoyed speaking to you. I mean, this
Yes.
is as much as you're saying that you found value, I found a lot of value in talking about it. So this is really cool. Thank you.
Thank you. If people want to connect with you,
Yes.
Yeah.
if people want to just follow you or kind of get some more of the goodness that you bring, where can we send them to?
Yeah, so my website is traumaconflictconsulting.com. I also have another landing page for mindfulparentingprogram.com
Okay.
for good parents. And then on Instagram, I'm at Cynthia_TCC. But yeah, you can Google me. I mean, I'm pretty much like
Yes.
fine.
Google her.
You heard it.
You can find me. I was like, almost like, unfortunately, like the Google SEOs, I forgot the abbreviation, are pretty high because of my name, uniqueness of my name. So like, I gotta figure out how to take out some pictures though, because that is a little problematic.
Yeah. You can really find her. That's what you say.
So, yeah, you can find me.
Awesome. Okay, we will be sure to like tag that, do all the things behind the scenes that we got to do. But thank you again. Seriously, appreciate you sharing with us.
Awesome.
This is lovely.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
See y'all till next time.